from an underwater beauty to a shriveled and sand-blasted hell would suggest a long time has passed since their fall. And also that the snail shamans who grant Hornet the elegy of the deep suggest the hearts of Farloom's greatest were ancient. But others, like how one of Redania's princes submitted to the Citadel and Cogwork legions, which wouldn't have existed at this point, and how the mortal Scar Singer Carmelita is, albeit weak, still kicking, suggests more recent deaths of civilizations past. Again, I think this points to a gradual decline. Please let me hear your own theories. In any event, Farloom, under the blessing of the Pale Monarch and the guidance of the Weavers, grew into a kingdom of splendor, far more advanced than any other beheld. A religion soon developed in which the Weavers were seen as divine children of the god Mother Silk, and enthralled bugs exalted them in song and action. Widow's Silk memory shows, however, that the Weavers remained Mother Silk's slaves. The shining light, her influence which flooded their minds with servitude.
The summer squeeze at Club Lime. It's a sweaty upper lip as your gym crush does a dip. It's letting yourself take it slow when your hormones say nope. It's soft launching fitness. And can I still do this? It's breaking routine and a break from the social scene. It's accidental eye contact and trying to figure out that. It's a PB on the sled and a wedgie as you tread. It's nailing chest and tries and awkward goodbyes. When you give it a squeeze, anything is possible.
You wire the lights, fix the leaks, and keep the world running. You deserve technology that works as hard as you do. Tighten your operations and capture every billable dollar with Simpro, the AI-first operating platform built for the way you work.
The Weavers enjoyed a golden age, and Grandmother Silk reveled in the devotion heaped upon her. But soon, the dark truth of the Weavers' origins would surface and forever sever the mother from her daughters. Deep in the Slab's prisons, behind the doors of apostasy and bound in powerful silk runes, lies the first sinner. A Weaver forced to endure eternity in a near-death feud. The first sinner was, according to this lore tablet, guilty of the sin of apostasy, penance by constriction, absolution denied. As her name suggests, the sinner was first among Weavers to turn apostate, to spew heresy and renounce the religion of Grandmother Silk. But why? Her Silk memory, which is one of the deepest to navigate in the game, suggesting both her age and her knowledge, holds the memory orb of the Weavers' elevation. Their mother lied. The Weavers weren't God-born. They were simply mortal beasts, raised in ability to shower silk with faith. The truth of their enslavement was enough for the first sinner to rebel against Grandmother Silk. But how did the sinner happen upon this revelation? It seems critical information that the Grandmother would guard well. This one's husk held a masterful talent to weave silk into blazing runes. Throughout my life, I've seen runes woven for many tasks. Was she the first to hone such skills? The Hunter's Journal entry suggests the first sinner was one of the most capable weavers regarding the mystic art of silk manipulation. From their webbed aesthetic and connection to silk-fueled entities, it would seem memories of Farloom's past are tied to silk. Perhaps the first sinner's skill in weaving allowed her to access the most distant, most restricted memories of her past and discover the profane truth. And her Needlin monologue during the boss fight reveals in part, cursed by silk, cursed with silk, cursed to know the sin, the truth, cursed to know, suggesting her use of silk is what led to knowledge in the first place. But I'd like to offer an additional theory, one that takes us to the kingdom's bedrock and the depths of the Abyss. The Abyss, which appeared in the original Hollow Knight, lies beneath the rest of the world and is home to the Void, a black, unknowable substance, semi-sentient, that hungers for the soul of all things. The void is a force, much like entropy. It seeks to claim everything, and it appears not even the power of higher beings is enough to defeat it. A deep dock diving bell, which we're told was used long ago, connects Farloom to the abyss, where we see remnants of Weaver activity, including Weavenest Absalom, dedicated to researching the void, as this chamber of void-filled jars illustrates. It could have been that the first sinner operated in the abyss, and that its influence severed the Grandmother's silken connection, in essence, liberating her mind from the Pale Monarch. But, as we'll soon see, the Weave Nests might not have been built at this time, so again, let me know your thoughts. Knowledge of the first sin rattled Farloom. Rumor set silken strands ablaze, and the absolute authority of Grandmother was put to question. A great war of religion swept across the kingdom with disastrous consequences. The fact that the first sinner was imprisoned in the first place supports that not all Weavers were united in rebellion against the Grandmother, nor were all other bugs. Some clung to their faith, their minds remained enthralled, and they took up arms against their brethren.
By the way,
Another period whose length is impossible to make certain unfolded as Grandmother Silk waged civil war against her daughters, who fought desperately for freedom. Turmoil lasted long enough for several events to transpire. First was the
That's too much work.
development of a network of secret tunnels known as Weave Nests. The ruins of 5 can be explored by Hornet in the current day, but perhaps others existed. This low, her gaze escaped. Prepare, sisters. Weave hope anew, that we might break free this accursed web, born of our naive foundation. As Weave Nest Atla's lore tablet suggests, the Weave Nests were shrouded in some warding power that blinded them to Grandmother Silk's vision. There's a theory that the Grandmother is physically blind, that she instead sees through the vibrations in her silken strands, and that she senses the subtle aura of soul emanating from others. The Weavers might have learned to cut her vision to protect their secret enterprise. Within these Weave Nests can be found benches, silk-powered blueprints, advanced technologies, and laboratories. Rebel Weavers experimented with their own silk skills to develop weapons with which they might overthrow their mother. The Snare Setter, a trap that factors into one of Silksong's endings, proves that the Weavers were close to finding an answer, but as the mysterious Ava, herself one of their experiments, explains. There, my mothers built their tools, all traps and bindings, small things, but tests for larger forms. I still remember their thoughts as they worked, their desperation and their hunger, another hopeless attempt to wrest their freedom. All ended in failure, of course. Second was the creation of Ava. This character is one of Silksong's more opaque and warrants a video in her own right, but we'll discuss her briefly. Hide her deep, the despised child, our shame shown in shell of iron. She is a wish cast vain, divinity mocked in form too frail. Ava was perhaps the Weaver's attempt to spin a being made entirely from silk. The only other creature remotely comparable was the primordial source herself. Their vanity pushed the Weavers to believe they could fight fire with fire. For many reasons, their attempt failed, and the delicate Ava remained in her iron cage. Again, the exact timeline is vague, but it could be during her war with the Weavers that the Grandmother tried her own hand at spinning creatures entirely born from silk. The result was the sisters Phantom and Lace. She spun us to fade. She spun us to break. Why us, sister? Why us? This silk memory within the exhaust organ is Phantom questioning her existence to Lace. Phantom was Mother Silk's first cruel attempt, and a success only in part. Over time, phantom silk stretched thin and her shell stiffened. Hers is a long but still transient life. Lace, meanwhile, is a form pristine. So long as she has access to silk stores to replenish, she remains swift, immortal. Look of a child and a mind to match, but hers been up wandering the citadel longer than most. Even in its long silence, way fore you came and roused its ire. These words from the first shrine caretaker suggest Lace is much older than most, supporting the idea that she could have been spun in a time before the weavers disappeared. But then again, the grandmother's own words from Lace's silk heart memory reveal, better a child spun frail than none, better a child spun purer than them, one to wish our waking, from our silk, a child born loyal. So not only did the grandmother wish to replace weavers with children completely loyal to her, but she spun them to wish her own waking. This would suggest Phantom and Lace were woven after the grandmother's imprisonment, though how and how long after isn't quite clear. The Pale Monarch's ire was too great for many weavers, so began their ancient diaspora. Entire clans of sisters fled Farloom to distant lands where they might escape the pull of Grandmother Silk. We see in ruined Weavenest Sindril, at the fringes of the kingdom, a weaver rune that maps regions beyond Farloom. Close by rests a rune harp artifact that recorded one weaver's plea. Flee, sisters, flee until your strength exhausts. So far you may escape at last her silken sight, to start anew, to sustain, free of web and service eternal. Farloom was depopulated of weavers as sisters scurried to freedom. This ties into the lore surrounding the original Hollow Knight and sheds light on the arrival in Deepnest of Hera and her weaver sisters. From Farloom they came to the fringes of Hallownest, and this is just one more reason that explains why they never submitted to the Pale King's rule. They had just cut ties with Grandmother Silk, so it's understandable the weavers would be apprehensive of another pale being. Hallownest was just one of several destinations for weavers in exile. Those that remained carried a solemn burden to continue the fight against a god. Grandmother Silk mobilized immense force against the weavers in the battle for Farloom. It's safe to assume that many bugs remained enthralled to her will. Also, as the primal source of silk and the being that gave them their power, it's hard to imagine all weavers could free themselves from slavery. But many did, and they used their inherited domineering aura to press lesser bugs into rebellious service. The bugs of your land, I have watched them, climbing towards their absolution without the flicker of a thought to what it means. Aye, but isn't it always such for those snared to serve your higher caste? Our mortal mob did once act some defiance, unawares maybe, but successful in part, goaded toward it by the weaver's will. Talking with the Maskmaker uncovers this subtle hint that the mortal bugs of Farloom rallied to the weaver's call to lay low a god. As many believed the weavers divine, it took little coaxing. For unknown days, months, years perhaps, the war-torn kingdom suffered, but eventually the weavers succeeded in doing the impossible. They cast down their Pale Monarch. Though Grandmother Silk was defeated, she wasn't destroyed. Killing their source of silk might spell the weavers' own doom. Their time spent experimenting and crafting within the weave nests resulted in a plan. Using their combined silk and ability, the weavers played magically charged harmonies to lull Grandmother Silk into a deep and unnatural slumber. Wrapped in a cocoon of silk, placed inside a cradle at the summit of Farloom's Citadel of Song, the Pale Monarch would remain.
AFL is war without weapons.
It's one of the biggest rivalries.
We're in a do-or-die scenario.
When the final siren goes, it's just relief and absolute joy.
indefinitely. The tethers that enslaved them were severed. The weavers and their allies rejoiced in victory, and as peace settled, it ushered in another era for Farloom. In fact, both the cradle and the citadel of song were constructed for one purpose: Mother Silk's imprisonment. This would suggest the citadel, its grandeur, and its reputation didn't predate her slumber, but rather arose because of it. The weavers faced two challenges in the wake of war. First was that their trap required continuous streams of magically empowered silk, combined with a lullaby sung indefinitely. If they faltered, the pale being would wake, an eternal task. Second was that the weavers were themselves depleted in number and power, and couldn't maintain their role forever. As Ava relates, "My mothers shared the curse of their tribe. To conceive a child is a painful, near impossible task." Put simply, the weavers slipped towards extinction. A solution to both problems took form in the citadel of song and its demanding religion. You speak of the citadel. Its former function has failed, but I can still sense its purpose some. It is church and cage both. Aye, devised by your ancestors that monstrosity, and their wicked, clever minds. A system, or a web they'd likely call it, a way to keep their mother sealed in slumber and themselves free to lavish in their false rule. The weavers that remained in Farloom usurped the position of deity from Grandmother Silk and basked in dominion. From the weaver effigy artifacts scattered through Farloom, bone idols of weaver forms, we get a sense of the citadel's religious fervor. The effigies speak of Camera, Kilal, and Atla, each weaver tied to a distinct vocation or foundational system. Atla, for example, was the weaver of time, and the description of her effigy reads, "By grace of your example, and our history held full in mind, our song is yours, as your name is sacred. Weaver Atla, may you be praised eternal." The history spoken of, however, wasn't the truth. The weavers used their power over will and silk to launch a propaganda campaign and revision of past events so that the memory of Grandmother Silk faded with subsequent generations, and that Farloom would ultimately know only the superiority of the weavers. But the weavers themselves had to adjust to this new age and tame base impulse. Two lore tablets found in Mossholm and Shellwood speak of how mortal bugs must be looked after, must be protected rather than hunted. Sister, spider, husk bound to moss, watch over these bugs born low, raised up by fervor fostered, born and caught within our web unknowing. Watch over these bugs, passing safe, warded by fear, no longer your meal. As its influence expanded, the weavers founded 3 co-equal orders within the Citadel of Song to preserve the mission long after their own deaths: the conductors, the vault keepers, and the architects. The conductors were to become Farloom's stewards. As inheritors of the weaver's duty, they were charged with guiding the kingdom's future, directing its decisions, and ensuring the silk song that kept the Pale Monarch asleep never silenced. As this rune harp, given to conductor Balador before the last weaver's death, relates, "Sisters, spiders, the burden is past. These simple bugs shall bear it full, never to cease, never to silence." The vault keepers, as their hunter's journal entry reads, were high caste bugs, responsible for delivering sermons and leading prayer for those beyond the walls of the whispering vaults, to root out and condemn those not seen as sufficiently fervent. The vault keepers documented and preserved Farloom's history to better educate its present. The architects, the last group created, are also the most interesting of the 3. They aren't bugs at all, at least in the traditional sense. The architects, and those under their jurisdiction, are automatons, creations of cogwork meant to imitate life. Its core is filled with fine mechanisms, but that alone should not produce such a convincing mimic of life. Silk must also be used to animate this artifice, though exactly how, I am not sure. The Cogwork Choirbug's journal entry suggests advanced technology in intricate twining of silk and steel to produce artificial life. The architects built and administered Farloom's Cogwork core, the beating heart of the Citadel that ensured all programs ran smoothly. All defenses and tasks were in order. By the time Hornet arrives in Farloom, only one architect remains, but from its words we can imagine the gleaming early days of their order. Impressive, industrious, eternal. You have seen a glimpse, Bug Red, of us, how we once were, the minds of architects inspired, what majesty we did create.
Whose idea was it, anyway? To add sweet, spicy honey sriracha sauce to the big brekkie range. The boss, of course. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
With Subscriptions Manager in the BankWest app, you can see everything in one place, which means less time worrying about forgotten signups and more time worrying about gravity.
So, an elaborate caste system to assist the Weavers in maintaining their prison took shape. Weavers, known as the First Children, stood above all other bugs. Beneath them were the three factions. Then came the devout choristers, clergy and priests of the Citadel, who organized the ranks of devout soldiers. Laborers in the forges, underworks and factories next. Lowest were the simple pilgrims, their sin yet judged, and their zeal yet proven. Faith offered both subservience and manpower. The Citadel's religion provided endless streams of pilgrims to perform vital tasks the dwindling number of Weavers couldn't maintain alone. And all wrapped in a simple package, to cleanse sin through work, to sustain Farloom eternal. Not all was offered willingly, and one of the architect's first creations were the Clockwork Sentinels. A gleaming order, Clockwork Sentinels, so impressive, majestic in function, they were charged, bound to the highest holy duty. Long before the creation of the core, the Sentinels ventured, even beyond these walls, to see all bugs brought, forced, safe to serve the Citadel. Those who didn't flock to the chime of church bells were brought as slaves by force. With their solution built, with their Citadel humming with the eternal song of imprisonment, the last strength of the Weavers evaporated. Dozens of communities spread to distant lands, always with the hope of one day returning. The handful that remained prepared their final resting place. Weaver shrines dot Farloom and are interesting sights. Seemingly hewn from stone or else fossilized remains of a Weaver's body, they both honor a life gone and preserve the spiritual essence of the deceased. The Weavers interred are suspended between life and death. Though they have long since decayed physically, the Weaver shrines carry their lingering silk memories and just enough soul to perhaps see them resurrected in a future where the variables are right. Their longing is aroused when Hornet approaches the shrines. As each activates, it tells her, "Daughter of a distant land, we who remained have waited long. Bind our strength to yours, reclaim the future of our haunted kingdom." With that, the First Children disappeared. Their duty was passed to the mortal bugs of Farloom. The Citadel of Song reverberated with thousands of voices and harmonies that kept a pale being in slumber, and slowly, the truth drowned beneath a tide of dogma and indoctrination. For a brief period, Farloom hummed as intended, but soon, time crushed the Citadel of Song's purpose beyond recognition. The Weaver's memory, a blind shepherd whose flock strayed as days from their absence progressed. This shrinking of knowledge brought a period painted dark by the Citadel's oppression, its corruption, and its exploitation of the masses. Over time, choristers and leading members of the clergy accrued immeasurable wealth in the tithes gathered from lower castes. They manipulated notions of sin and penance to force many bugs into lightless servitude. As this tablet in the Marrow states, "Pilgrim, you are blessed to walk the foundations of Farloom. Humble yourself before the shells of those who gave their lives to hold our kingdom's weight." Miners forged in the heat of deep docks, the spinsters of Greymoor reaped and reamed on penalty of death, the soot-filled Citadel underworks scrubbed endlessly. Various other lore tablets illustrate how deeply deference to the Citadel was ingrained in the culture. Litany of the Worker. May we catch the dregs and never tire. May we clean the dregs and never hunger. May we spool the dregs and never falter. At the 7th bell toll, send 30 measures, 4 beats smoke rock, 8 beats sweet smelt, mark of fealty, all workers. Disobedience wasn't permitted. All served the idea of Farloom eternal, but as the age passed, ambition stained its intent. In this time, Farloom society was cleanly divided into the haves and have-nots. The Citadel members basked in opulence. The religion of the Weavers was seized by the 3 factions. As inheritors of the blessed work, maintaining the Pale Monarch's slumber, these factions themselves grew semi-divine in the eyes of citizens, and their power bloomed. But power tends to corrupt. Faith and economy were inextricably linked, and the Citadel manipulated both. A pilgrim, drawn by the peal of the bells, arrived at the kingdom's bottom and was made to endure a grueling climb to the top. Pilgrim, accept the judgment of the rise beyond, that all who stand at Farloom's holy crest prove pure of will and want. A journey supposed to cleanse through adversity sin from the believer, but ultimately killed most. Settlements and trade nodes sprang up along pilgrim routes. Farfields, the halfway house of Greymoor, the Grand Bellheart, offered brief respite. Here, the poor traded in symbols of faith, rosary beads. As seen by the loot dropped upon their death compared to members of the Citadel, these citizens were destitute. So what drove them? All believed in the myth of the Citadel, a paradise where clean water flowed, where food and safety and companionship were plenty. To be accepted through its gates was a citizen's goal and injected the strength to continue. Since the Weaver's disappearance, much of the pilgrim's route had grown wild and dangerous, but as they neared the blasted steps, the Citadel's gilded judges loomed over them, offering both protection and judgment. These soldiers tested the faith of the pilgrims, and the last judge stood as final arbiter before the Citadel's grand gate. The sinless gained entry, the sinful perished. Stunned by the grandeur and majesty of the Citadel, pilgrims were ushered in. They believed their trials over, but they had just begun. They were loaded into a massive elevator, and as you can see in the map, it only has space to go down. The bugs weren't risen to leisure, but rather plunged into the underworks, where they were made to take a brush, mill, wool, and serve Farloom eternal.
Feeling good. Feeling good.
A sentiment of many can be heard in dialogue with the pitiful creature, Loam. Me cannot rest. Us works, and Citadel breathes, and thems above do sing, and all is right. And when us works enough, them sees it, and us gets us holy reward. The Citadel, most miracle of a place, bright and holy, fresh water for all, much as can drink, air so clean can see the great roofs above. Even those who did ascend to the Citadel's upper reaches were made to carry on the burden of Mother Silk's slumber. The choristers and envoys of the Citadel led lavish lives compared to most bugs, but they too were slaves of the system the weavers had created. Initiates were made to veil their faces as symbol of devotion to the choir. Now, this is an interesting detail. We know from speaking with the mask makers in both Hallownest and Farloom that a bug's mask greatly influences their identity, their memory, their individuality. It could be that by taking up the cloth, Citadel bugs lost themselves to a greater cause that demanded absolute obedience. The conductors were first among the Citadel. Their commandments dictated what all other factions would pursue. The Vault Keepers preached religious fervor. They taught future generations of obligations and duties, and tried to preserve lost knowledge. And the first architects, themselves automatons, manufactured increasingly intricate robots to work the core. At some period, perhaps in this time, the Citadel recruited 3 famed sisters, 3 master pinstresses, to train their choral members in the way of pin and needle. As their martial prowess grew, the Citadel of Song's authoritarian grip continued to squeeze neighboring regions as much as those within its own kingdom. As time slipped, as silk grew scarce without weavers to produce it, and as generations of bugs died, an existential question emerged. How could the Citadel serve its eternal purpose if its bugs were mortal? A solution came in 2 prongs, one of which can be found in the ghastly surgical bays of White Ward. Here, bugs were seduced by the promise of immortality and carried out experiments using the power of soul imbued within silk. Have you done it yet, bell ringer? Wriggled deep, discovered the depths of obsession that brought this place so low. If you speak of this Citadel and its silk, caretaker, then yes, I now know the start of it. In the ward down below I saw it clear, the hollowed husks and the many torturous implements. Machines to instill a bug with thread that would see their life extended. Aye, that's it in part, but there's more scale to it than all that. Just think of them greedily shoving the silk into their shells, the madness that overcame them. Eternal life for mortal bugs. Then think on how long it's all gone on. Citadel surgeons began infusing silk into the shells of the choir so that they could continue the endless task forever. Just as the Citadel was a machine to gather labor, so too did it become a machine to recycle silk and souls. As the sinister oath of the White Ward reads, "While song must be sung, none may falter. Infirmity, sickness, death, all are banished from our Citadel." Death became a sin and was not an end to work. As this surgical room hints, the lumaflies that flutter throughout Farloom are, in fact, the silken filaments of a deceased soul. Nita Lynn reveals the pained memories. Please remember my voice, to serve beyond shell, to devote eternal. Why this pain? Must we? Dying bugs had their souls reaped, then their corpses were piled high to be burned in these roaring chambers below. What happened to these souls connects to the second prong of the Church's solution, transcendence through artificial life. And lo, is eternity sustained. By architect's claw, we welcome that final form, of dial and rotor and soul gladly given, the perfect, unfaltering voice. Architects charged their cogwork creations with lumaflies. Automatons were powered by a bug's soul. We see this when lumaflies escape a broken cogwork creation. And in the Hunter's Journal of many cogwork enemies, there are hints that these artifacts are more than unfeeling metal. The decision to utilize silk, to literally weave it into their own bodies, was an inflection point in the Citadel's history that ultimately brought its ruin. It's here, I believe, that Grandmother Silk began to stir from her slumber. As the primal source of silk, Pale Bing is entwined with all Farloom's threads, and even weakened as she was, retained some influence over it. This is where I think the subtle signs of the haunting first began. Heart of the haunting, long lulled to slumber and desperate to wake. the higher being's threads stretched throughout Farloom, snaring its bugs and driving them to madness and discord. Although most bugs state that the haunting is a relatively recent event when Hornet comes to Farloom, the decline appears gradual. It parallels the takeover of another higher being, the Radiance, that assaulted through dreams the bugs of Hallownest. The Radiance's infection that ravaged Hallownest began first as images presented to sleeping bugs stirred their minds to frenzy. It wasn't until much later that the infection burst forth in earnest, just as the haunting has done in Farloom. I'd like to take a moment to analyze the poem Farloom's Folly, written by conductor Romino, that shows in the first cutscene of the game. They see your beauty, so frail and fine. They see your peace, woven of faith and toil. They forget your heart, bound in slumber and servitude. When you wake, they shall see your truth, a beast's nature, bare to all. This is a poem about the kingdom of Farloom as much as it is about its pale monarch. Grandmother Silk and her land inseparable. Bugs saw the beauty and opportunity present in Silk. They coveted the resource. Their religion and eternal service created a rigid society that enforced peace. But the true folly of which Romino speaks is the Citadel believing it ruled at all, believing it could control or exploit the kingdom Silk. In generations, they've forgotten the bestial nature of their monarch's heart, and on her waking, all would be revealed in destruction. But they also forgot the nature and heart of Farloom. It's a machine built to harvest the souls and the labors of the pilgrims. As a conductor, Romino was privy to restricted information, and that he speaks of such topics suggests it was written before the haunting completely consumed Farloom. The irony is that few bugs would understand the warning laced within his writing, and shortly came the madness. The first signs were invisible, an insidious decay, small whispers, not their own, in the back of the Citadel's mind, that lured them from the path towards destruction. This brings us to an interesting object found discarded in the darkness of whispering vaults, the pious Isomor. This mechanical statue is one of a pilgrim, and its likeness can actually be seen in the background in Bone Bottom. Once awakened, Isomor welcomes pilgrims upon being accepted into the Citadel, offers kind words but also a harsh warning. Pilgrim, cast aside those many sinful hopes for rest and reward. Remain pure within our midst. Ask for nothing. See the Citadel's simple stone, bare and unadorned. See how plain our garb, how sparse our meal. Know that excess is sin. Stay vigilant. For those wretched pilgrims who dare relent their base desires, left unpunished, thin our pure chorus, their seductive sin spread like flame. In its first form, the clergy shunned ostentation and wealth as sin, but with Grandmother Silk's threads corrupting their minds, the Citadel turned against its old view.
Shave close.
Redness that burns.
Shave gently. Missed hairs.
Gillette Fusion Power has micropulses that reduce blade pressure for a close shave without the irritation. Power on, irritation gone. Gillette.
We're for open road explorers and adventure seekers. And right now, we're for Tyson, who just saved 9 cents a litre on premium fuel at Ampol Foodery. Join My NRMA Rewards, a world of road, travel and rewards.
As it grew opulent, it decommissioned the statue that pointed out hypocrisy. What's more interesting is that, at least to me, there's a suspiciously large space on the right-hand side of the room where the statues of conductors, vault keepers, and architects sing the threefold melody. Perhaps there was a fourth faction, dedicated to the pilgrims, the fuel of Farloom, that didn't survive the citadel's decay, and Pius Isamor banished. The church's corruption was mirrored by its surrounding environs. The regions, now known as Bylewater and the Putrefied Ducts, were once pristine. Their waters carried nourishment rather than toxin. Waste produced by the citadel was disposed into these sluiceways, and shortly they transformed into rotting swamps. This, at least in part, is why the Stillkin, Bylewater's natives, turned fiercely rebellious against the church. A domino effect threw the path of Sinner's Road into a muck-maggot-infested nightmare, and a constant, grim drizzle forever clouded Greymoor. It's around this time where Verdania, the great kingdom already mentioned, might have fallen to blight. In vain effort to spare the land's glory, one of Verdania's princes agreed to aid the Citadel of Song. His genius created cogwork masterpieces used by the architects, but the price was his body and soul. All was for naught, as Verdania died shortly after its prince. His lover, the Green Prince, wallowed in misery and went searching for his lost mate, but heavy with resignation, decided to languish after his capture in Sinner's Road. And Scarsinger Carmelita exhausted her voice to sing a melody that resisted the haunting. These fields still display life and growth, even as the lands around erode to dust. There's a hot harmony here that eludes the gray wastes above and the dry marrow beside. The Hunter's March was protected behind Carmelita's aura, but her mortal strength couldn't outlast an immortal being. Even the disciplined and eusocial Scar colony succumbed to the Citadel's and, now by extension, Grandmother Silk's designs. From the mottled Scar's needle in, strength faded, all for her, the last, loyal, loved. Why this way? As Grandmother Silk's influence seeped into the Citadel of Song, her desires molded its apparatus. It could be, at this time, that veiled envoys and choristers were dispatched to lands beyond to gather the first children that escaped long ago. Rune-infused cages were used to capture weavers and their descendants, though for what purpose is up to speculation. It could be that the Pale Monarch needed the weaver's silk or their presence to completely undo the spell that kept her dreaming. Or it could be the weavers were drained of their silk to further White Ward's infusions. The Citadel also turned on its own. Those of sufficient will to resist haunting whispers, or those without silk in their shells, were hunted down by members of the choir. The most notable victims were the Pinstress sisters. They fought a valiant retreat and escaped from the Citadel. The sisters parting hid in Farloom's reaches. One to the swamps of Bylewater, one to the blasted steppes, and one to the far fields. They were heavily pursued. The fourth chorus, a massive cogwork creation, was sent to destroy one sister, but she defeated it, then donned the humble guise of a seamstress. Others within the church were excised. We hear in the Maestro's Hunter's Journal, once they summoned song from their subjects, now they rise only to command an end to those unstrung. Some defiance emerged from beyond the Citadel's gates. A snail shaman, a seeker, attempted to gather allies and overthrow the Veiled Ones, but met his doom in Bylewater. Braver than most, and as little a fan of this Citadel as you yourself, went to seek an alliance with those basic bugs of the swamps. Thought